Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please stand for the arrival of the Honorable Frundell Q, Prime Minister, the Honorable Ralph E. Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and leader of the Unity Party. Of the national anthem and prayers by Monsignor Vincent Harcourt Blackett.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Errol Barrow Center for Creative Imagination. We wish to remind you that neither smoking, eating, drinking, nor any form of photography, videography, or audio recording is permitted in the theater unless prior permission has been granted. It is at this time that we also invite you to turn off all mobile phones and pagers for the duration of the presentation.
Let me say a very pleasant good evening to everyone, and Honorable Frundell Shore, Prime Minister of Barbados, Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, a longtime friend who is going to give this lecture this evening. Very good evening to you, all other distinguished ladies and gentlemen. And I certainly am looking forward, especially after reading what was published from what you said, Dr. Gonzalez. I look forward to your lecture. I want to assure you that we are still praying for your country after the tragedy recently and last year as well. And we want you to know that we are supporting you with our prayers and however else we can. And also, St. Vincent's Day was just celebrated. I share that in common with you because it's my own feast day, so I remembered St. Vincent on that day. Let us now turn to the Lord and ask him to guide us through this evening's lecture. Father in heaven, we thank you and we praise you for gathering us together as we remember the father of our nation, Errol Barrow. We ask you to continue to enhance the work that he's begun in lifting this small island to nationhood. We pray, Lord, for all those who've been chosen to carry on his work, that they would do so with the same zeal that he had. We pray, Lord, for Dr. Gonzalez, who is going to speak to us this evening. And we ask that you would send your Holy Spirit upon him to guide him, so that whatever he says would be for your greater honor and glory and the building of our nation and our region. O Holy Spirit, soul of our souls, we adore you, enlighten, guide, strengthen, and console us. Tell us what we ought to do and command us to do it. We promise to be submissive in everything you should ask of us and accept all you permit to happen to us. Show us only what is your holy will. Amen. Thank you.
Please be seated. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Walcott Warner Theatre at the Errol Barrow Center for Creative Imagination at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus for the Errol Barrow Memorial Lecture and Award Ceremony hosted by the Democratic Labour Party. My name is Dale Ford, and I'm your MC for the evening. At this time, I would like to invite Senator Verla de Pisa to present the welcome.
The Right Honourable Frundell Stewart, Prime Minister of Barbados, Dr. the Honourable Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, President of the Senate, the Honourable Carrie Ann Eiffel, other parliamentarians present here today, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Monsignor Vincent Harcourt Blackett, representatives of the Barrow family, specially invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to the annual Errol Barrow Memorial Lecture hosted by the Democratic Labour Party, especially this particular one in our 60th year of existence. It is a year in which we pause to reflect, a signal year for any political organization, any public organization, to have pause and reflect on where we have come from, where we are now, and where we intend to be. A time when there is a rationalization of our process in terms of our policy, our initiatives, but never of our philosophy. It is a time as well when we pause to reflect on those persons who have helped to build and shore up the party, especially during harsh times. And I am not just speaking about harsh economic times, but harsh times for our party, for we have had our doldrum years. Tonight is a night when we celebrate the nuts and bolts of our party, those persons who gave selflessly over the years, who got no major recognition up until this point, who are not the forefront runners in the party, but without whom we would be unable to function. We celebrate them tonight, and I thank you for joining us to celebrate them. More importantly, though, we seek knowledge and information to move ourselves forward in these trying times. and times when we need to rationalize our process. And to that end, Prime Minister Gonzalez, we welcome your thought and your insight. We've read some of your writings, particularly on Barbados, and like our moderator, I wait with bated breath to learn more of what you have in store in your thoughts for this country. And I invite all of you tonight to listen carefully, pay attention, and garner knowledge, but not just for the sake of it, for action to make our country better. And I invite you to spend the short moments that you'll be with us in reflection and think carefully about where you wish this country to be and your image of this country and how we all can work to get there. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I thank you for your presence here tonight, and do have an enjoyable time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator DePisa. I now invite Senator the Honorable Maxine McLean, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, to introduce the featured speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The Right Honourable Frundle Stewart, Prime Minister of Barbados, Dr. the Honourable Ralph Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Her Honour, Senator Kerry Ann Eiffel, President of the Senate, members of the Cabinet of Barbados, members of Parliament, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of the Barrow family here with us this evening, Monsignor Vincent, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor and pleasure to have been asked to introduce our distinguished guest speaker this evening, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Everett Gonzalez, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I am particularly pleased to welcome you, sir, to the Errol Barrow Center for Creative Imagination to deliver the annual Errol Barrow Memorial Lecture. I am also pleased, as a former student of yours in the 1970s, to welcome you back to Cave Hill campus of the University of the West Indies. Prime Ministers, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are indeed fortunate to have with us here this evening a true Caribbean citizen. Prime Minister Gonzalez has distinguished himself in many spheres over his life as a student in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, at the University of the West Indies, and in the United Kingdom, and as an academic here in Barbados, as a practicing attorney at law, and of course, as a politician and Prime Minister. Ralph Gonzalez, the child. Ralph E. Gonzalez, known affectionately as Comrade Ralph, even in his days as an academic, was born, as you might have heard, in the rural village of Colinari, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, to a father, Alban Gonzalez, a farmer and small businessman, and his mother, Theresa Francis, a small businesswoman. His four parents came to St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the 1800s as indentured servants from the Portuguese-ruled island of Madeira, some 300 kilometers, I'm told, off the northeast coast of Morocco in northwest Africa. And this perhaps explains why we at Cave Hill in those days thought of him as young Fidel Castro when we sat in his class in the Faculty of Social Sciences. Of course, in that respect, or in relation to that name, there were other reasons, including his ideological perspective at that time. I don't know if I can say at this time. Perhaps. Ralph, the university student. Ralph would have attended the University of the West Indies, Cape Mona campus, from where he obtained the BSc Economics and MSc in Government degrees. He later went to the University of Manchester in England, from where he secured his PhD in government, and where, as part of his doctoral studies, he would have attended the Makerere University in Uganda, East Africa, as a research associate, where he conducted research for his PhD thesis. And of course, as you would imagine, that thesis focused on issues relating to an issue of importance to the Caribbean. And instead of looking at the Caribbean, however, he wrote on the political economy of trade unions in industrial relations in Uganda, 1950 to 1971. He was also a qualified, or is a qualified lawyer, having attended and completed his study in law at Gray's in London, from where he obtained his degree of Uta Barrister, Professor Law Qualifications. I hope I pronounced that properly, attorneys at law. But he was not only an academic, he had an active life as a student. He was involved, of course, in a range of academic pursuits, but also a range of extracurricular activities. He was known for his public speaking and debating, cricket. He played the steel band. I was actually a tenor pan player for the University Steel Band. I hope you can still play, sir. He was also involved in journalism and was part of the preparation of the student newspaper. He would have received the Student of the Year award in 1969 and would have also represented our university at the American Debating Championships, and I am sure he was very successful. A former Guild of Undergraduates president, I guess he would have developed his capacity to lead. And of course, he was the first Vincentian at Mona to have been Student of the Year, championship debater, of course. But he's also known to many of us on this campus as a lecturer par excellence. He taught several courses in political science before turning to the legal profession and later politics. But there's also Ralph, the family man, father of five children. And the information in your booklets is a little bit dated. His children range from the age of 42 to 19. And I am happy to say that one of them is following closely in his footsteps, the now Minister of Foreign Affairs of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a brilliant young man in his own right. Married to Eloise Gonzalez née Harris, a Trinidadian of Dominican parentage. He's the proud father of, as I said, 5 children with very interesting names, especially the last 3, Isis, Storm, and Soleil. I think you are fascinated with the elements, sir. And having achieved all of those, he went on to begin and continue an excellent career as a parliamentarian of many years, successful politician, political leader, and now Prime Minister. And of course, in rotation, chair of the heads of government of CARICOM. I believe that as you peruse the information in our booklet, it is clear that Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonzalez has made a significant impact on the landscape of the Caribbean, a prolific writer of not only academic writings. He has done what many of us have asked our Caribbean people to do, and that is to capture in writing issues of significance to the region and indeed to the world. I would not attempt to list the range of publications, academic and otherwise, that, as I stand here, I assign as homework. And therefore, as you can imagine, we have in our guest lecturer tonight an excellent individual, quite capable of presenting what I know, and I'm sure most of us here would agree, will be an important, exciting, very interesting, and useful lecture in the name of the right excellent Errol Walton Barrow, our father of independence and the great man after whom this building is named. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask that you welcome Dr. the Honorable Rav Gonzalez.
Thank you. Madam Chairperson, my dear friend and comrade, Prime Minister Frondell Stewart, members of Cabinet and Parliament, and our very distinguished President of the Senate, and former honorable members of Parliament and members of the Diplomatic Corps, the Errol Barrow family, Father Blackett, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I first of all would like to thank Maxine for her kind introduction. I want to express my gratitude to Father Blackett for the prayers that he and the Christian community in Barbados and elsewhere in the Caribbean and the world have been lifting up our country, our people, and particularly those in Fancy, the area from which the 5 children who are dead and 2 are missing, presumed dead, in this very terrible accident on the 12th of January. I want to thank Frondell for his message of solidarity, both in terms of his written communication and also his telephone call. The prayers and those messages of solidarity fortify us in what is a very difficult period. The book of Deuteronomy instructs us that we must be strong, we must be courageous. Actually, these were the words of Moses when he was 120 years old, just before he was handing over the leadership to Joshua. He told the people, all the people of Israel, to be strong, to be courageous, that the Lord is with them. He would be with them always, and he would not forsake them. It was reiterating the essential message in Jacob's dream at Bethel and God's promise to us as recounted in the book of Genesis. And we believe very firmly, as Isaiah teaches us, that the good Lord will hold up his righteous right hand and help us in our difficulties. So I want to thank everyone for all their help and their solidarity. This follows upon just a disaster just a year before, natural disaster, when 12 of our citizens lost their lives, including a cousin of mine. Sometimes we don't make the comparison. The United States has a population of 330 million. If you do the comparison. 7 persons who died at rock gutter would be over 23,000 persons one time dying in the United States. Or in the case of Brazil, with 200 million people, 14,000 people dying one time. So we always have to bear these comparisons in mind, and I tell you, it has been a painful period for our country, and it is going to take a while for us to heal. I have spent, out of the last 11 days, I've been in Fancy on 8 occasions, and the visits have not been episodic. I have made sure that I go to the homes of everyone who has suffered in this tragedy. And tomorrow morning when I get home, I will go straight to Fancy. There's an event tonight where I've asked 3 of my ministers to join our parliamentary representative for the area. And tomorrow at Rock Gutter we have a wreath-laying ceremony, and on Sunday we have our funeral. Our parliament has been suspended for the period. I postponed my budget address on the appropriation bill. We will do that on Wednesday. But we take to heart the pleading for us to be strong and courageous. And I'm satisfied that what has happened to us is a test of our nation's resolve and our faith in Almighty God. Just over a year ago, we had this natural disaster, and I believe we have been meeting the challenges and we have been passing the test. And I have no doubt that we will do so with this one. My thanks again, Father Blackett and Frondel and all the people of Barbados and the Caribbean. Thank you. On January the 21st, 2015, that day was the 95th anniversary of the birth of the Right Excellent Errol Barrow, the father of the nation of Barbados, national hero and political icon of our Caribbean. On that day and in this week, the people of Barbados and the rest of our Caribbean civilization remember his life and work. Our collective remembrances of Errol Barrow, who died 27 years ago on June the 1st, 1987, occur at a time when the historical dust is settling, as it always settles, not merely to memorialize him as though entombed in a sepulchre, but to interrogate his philosophy, his ideas and actions, his political praxis in our quest to live markedly the condition of our life, living and production. Our memory of him is in our hearts and minds, especially so in the hearts and minds of ordinary men and women whose lives he touched for the better. This collective memory, more powerful and meaningful than any engraved stone or statue, is to be transmitted enduringly to generations yet born. This annual memorial lecture in Errol Barrow's honor is one important conveyance by which to ensure the continuance of his ideas and spirit and the salience of his practices for our times and beyond. I am thus blessed to have been asked by my dear friend and Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Frondell Stewart, to deliver this memorial lecture. It is a signal honor and privilege for the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, a sister Caribbean country which Errol Barrow knew well and loved dearly. It is generally acknowledged that Errol Barrow was not a fussy man. He did not stand on unnecessary ceremonies, save in the pursuit of excellence. In accord with his intentions, no grave in the land of Barbados contains his remains. Memorably, he had addressed this very matter at the 30th Annual Conference of the Democratic Labour Party at the George Street Auditorium on August 25, 1985, in typically robust language. Some of you may know this language, and those who do not, it'd be good to hear it for the first time. And those who have heard it before, it's always good to hear it. This is what he said. I hope that when I am called to my reckoning, since I do not require or need any outpouring of hypocrisy or glass enclosed shrine, that the press will omit to even mention my name, except to demand, if anyone tries to place me outside of the laws of Barbados, a coroner's inquest with full disclosure of the reasons for my withdrawal from this mortal scene. My mortal remains, after incineration, may be scattered from an aircraft in the Caribbean Sea, without any of the ghoulish and undignified caterwauling that passes for services in one of our main places of public entertainment. In one way or another, at some level or another, everyone of good sense and sensibility in our Caribbean is a disciple of Errol Barrow. Even those who tangled with him in partisan opposition in the metaphoric jungle of competitive politics. Of course, from historical experience, we do not usually speak ill of the dead. Thucydides had drawn our attention to this general phenomenon with his insights through his survey of the history of the Peloponnesian War, especially in the funeral oration of Pericles. He told us this: envy will exert itself against a competitor when life remains. But when death stops the competition, affection will applaud without restraint. But the admiration of Errol Barrow's extraordinary contribution to national and regional development goes way beyond the usual genuflection to a fallen hero. So let us together reflect on two central pillars of our present and future through the prism of Errol Barrow's political praxis, namely the idea of Barbados and its interconnected twin, our Caribbean civilization. I begin this discourse on the latter. Errol Barrow has always held that our Caribbean is possessed of an authentic, historically legitimate civilization, sui generis, of its own kind, with a trajectory for further ennoblement in the interests of our people's humanization. His understanding of the concept of our Caribbean civilization encompassed a body of civilized and civilizing elements, including critically a permanent presence reflecting ownership, not mere occupation, of a population in independent nationhood with global connectedness and with a core of shared, tried and tested values in an especial seascape and landscape, which provides a productive and technological apparatus sufficient to sustain our civilization's socioeconomic viability. A civilization is more than a society. It is much more than a state or a nation. Errol Barrow placed his marker down unequivocally on this existential issue in a speech delivered on November the 20th, 1986, in the United States of America at the 10th Miami Conference on the Caribbean. He affirmed the following, quote, "It is dehumanizing and false to view the Caribbean as potential American problems. We are peoples with an identity and a culture and a history. The Parliament of Barbados will be 350 years old in 1989. We don't need lessons in democracy from anyone. However severe the economic difficulties facing the Caribbean, we are viable, functioning societies with the intellectual and institutional resources to understand and grapple with our problems. Collectively, we have the resource potential for our continued development. And of course, we have a heritage of exquisite natural beauty entrusted to us. The Caribbean is, after all, a civilization," unquote. Unfortunately, many Caribbean political leaders and intellectuals mistakenly reject the view that the Caribbean constitutes an authentic, legitimate civilization. They tend to link erroneously a civilization with an imperium, as is manifested, for example, in the Roman, British, American, or Chinese civilization. A civilization does not require empire as a defining element. Barrow knew that the Caribbean, with no pretensions to imperium, was an island or seaboard civilization of a special type. Through the fever of history and the process of creolization, its population had become whole, indeed has become whole, despite some dissonance or social fracturing out of diverse peoples, some free, most unfree, who had largely come from disparate lands, and commingling and integrating with the residue of the indigenous inhabitants who had been almost totally decimated by European genocide. From culturally plural societies in which each cultural or racial section had its own distinct pattern of socio-cultural integration, we have metamorphosed or evolved into largely homogeneous nations with a distinctive Caribbeanness, which is as yet to find a single institutionalized political expression as a federal or quasi-federal entity. To be sure, our Caribbean has adopted and adapted salient features or elements from elsewhere, but we have fashioned them as our own amidst our homegrown evolutions. A central challenge for the contemporary Caribbean is to effect a transformation from a shared Caribbeanness to a sufficiently viable institutional expression of regional unity. This is an unfulfilled goal which Errol, Barrow and his Democratic Labour Party had set themselves at that party's inauguration, as reflected in its foundation documents. To be sure, he placed his high-quality intellect and other resources in quest of its fulfillment, but the regional political market allowed only coordinated trading arrangements in the Caribbean Free Trade Area, CARIFTA, and functional cooperation and economic integration through the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, both of which bore the stamp of his originating architecture. The Martinican intellectual, Edouard Glissant, in his thoughtful book, Caribbean Discourse, Selected Essays, addressed this very subject in a manner which would have secured Errol Barrow's approval. Quote, "As soon as we see a practical program, no matter how radical, hesitate in the face of choosing a Caribbean identity, we can offer the certain diagnosis of a hidden desire to be restrained by the limits imposed by non-history, by a more or less shameful alignment with metropolitan values that one can never, and with good reason, manage or control, by a fatal inability to have a sense of identity, unquote. Errol Barrow's commitment to the idea of our Caribbean civilization and its further ennoblement had at its center a mature nationalism which embraced an activist regionalism and internationalism without a descent into narrow chauvinism. His Caribbean particularism was always dialectically linked to widely accepted universal values and humanism, without which the upliftment of any people is impossible. From the beginning, this constellation of values was a noise in his blood and an echo in his bones. The affirmation of these and related principles were on display in Errol Barrow's incisive address at the Barbados Constitutional Conference in London in July 1966. It ought to be read and studied seriously on an ongoing basis in schools, universities, and the public marketplace of ideas in Barbados and the Caribbean. I shall quote this speech, this address, at length. Unlike many other colonial leaders, including several from the Caribbean, Errol Barrow did not go to London so much to negotiate independence as to assume it, to receive a formal constitutional imprimatur for independence which belonged to his people in fact. He did not go there to accept a constitution drafted in the constitution-making factory of the British government's bureaucracy. His intent and words to match were crystal clear. Quote, "In order that you, Mr. Secretary of State, should not be incommoded by our problems, we have assumed and discharged the responsibility of producing the Constitution under which the people of Barbados will continue to govern themselves after independence. As you would expect in a country with our parliamentary traditions, this Constitution was presented in draft, first to our legislature and then to our citizens," unquote. Barrow's assertive mood emerged from the inner strength of a finished political personality at 46 years of age. He was not a work in progress. Swiftly, he answered the query of fitness for self-rule, which had preoccupied the British, even those in a liberal tradition, since the publication of John Stuart Mill's treatise, Considerations on Representative Government. And that treatise was in 1861. Errol Barrow's answer was eloquent and brimful with nationalist self-confidence. Quote, "In our view," he said, "there can be no question whether Barbados is ripe and ready for independence. 3 centuries of history answer that question in the affirmative. You have never had to shore up our finances. You have never had to maintain or preserve public order among us. The people of Barbados have never given you any cause to worry, and no British government has ever been forced on our account to vindicate its policy at the bar of international opinion," unquote. Errol Barrow was acutely aware, as befitting one who was influenced by the philosophy and ideas of Marcus Garvey. A number of the Rastafari brethren may not know this. He was influenced by the ideas and the philosophy of Marcus Garvey. And he was acutely aware, Barrow that is, that racism, or at least racial prejudice, permeated the British political psyche to the disfavor of people of African descent in their quest for democratic self-rule. So at the Barbados Independence Conference, he met this lurking doubt head on. Quote, In assuming the burdens of independence, the people of Barbados have no illusions about their task. They are well aware that in this country, meaning Britain, it is commonly believed, although it is not a fact, that people of African origin cannot for long maintain democratic forms of government after independence. These people conveniently forget that the colonial system was designed not to promote free institutions, but to safeguard imperial interests, unquote. In any event, Barrow asserted a Barbados exceptionalism if one was required. He correctly declared that, quote, by some fortunate turn of history, the people of Barbados have managed to establish before their independence the solid framework of a free society. They have 3 centuries of steady maturity to draw on and a self-confidence sprung from the management of their own affairs, unquote. Barrow also assailed the objection of small size, which some even in Barbados were articulating as the basis for opposing its very quest for independence. After all, Barbados was up to then the smallest territory seeking independence from Britain. And so he was compelled to assert, quote, neither the smallness of their territory, that is to say the territory of the people of Barbados, nor the slenderness of their physical resources deters them in the path to nationhood. They have a modest part to play in the affairs of their region, the Commonwealth, and the world. And all they require from you, Mr. Secretary of State, is that you should speed them to their rendezvous with destiny sometime in 1966, unquote. Barrow, as Premier of Barbados, had set his own timetable for the Constitutional Conference's termination and the attainment of independence for Barbados. Remarkable. He set the timetable. Pointedly, infused with a profound nationalist spirit and a confidence of self, Errol Barrow accordingly directed the concluding remarks of his remarkable speech to his host, Secretary of State Fred Lee, personally. This is what he said. Mr. Secretary, we have a self-imposed curfew on the duration of these discussions. In that, the Barbados government has arranged to leave the United Kingdom on the 5th of July for an equally important meeting with our partners in Canada, unquote. There can be no time, he said, in the circumstances for the lowing herd to wind slowly o'er the lee. This, sir, he continued, is accord with your wishes and our intention to safeguard your person, even if your office is soon to be dissolved. My government, I assure you, sir, will not be found loitering on colonial premises after closing time. A Caribbean leader of rare quality has thus his nation Barbados on a path, the efficacy of which even a substantial number in his own country must have doubted. Independence was a great cause, and great causes have never been won by doubtful men and women. In our contemporary Caribbean, our leadership and people would do well to emulate Errol Barrow's mature nationalism, non-aligned posture, and profound sense of Caribbeanness. His first speech at the United Nations on the occasion of the admission of Barbados to membership of that august body in December 1966 is memorable for its oft-repeated tagline, friends of all, satellites of none. But in that address, he articulated themes which remain supremely relevant today, which including the pursuit of foreign policy as an extension, not a contradiction of domestic policy. The necessity and desirability of upholding the vital role of small states at the United Nations based on the doctrine of the equality of states. The obligation to battle for the elimination of global poverty as a prerequisite to the maintenance of international peace and justice. The importance of multilateralism, not superpower triumphalism in world affairs, and the requirement of large and small nations to respect and abide by the fundamental principles and ideals of the Charter of the United Nations. Today at the UN, these are foundation propositions which we still have to advance. Whether Frundell speaks there, or Maxine, or Ralph, or anybody else. And if you don't speak to those, you're not being wise. And you're not talking in the interest of the people of the Caribbean. The strength and assertiveness of Barrow's independent outlook and Caribbeanness are likely to startle timid souls today who have allowed their thought processes to be enslaved to the Washington consensus. Notice I've said not to be enslaved by, but to be enslaved to, because some people go into voluntary servitude. To be enslaved to the Washington consensus and a modern imperium which parades under the ideological label of neoliberalism. Take, for example, Barrow's blast against President Ronald Reagan's shameless appropriation of the independent, regionally inspired, unifying concept of the Caribbean Basin. That is to say, the Caribbean and Latin American countries washed by the Caribbean Sea. And the bastardization of this concept into an American Trojan horse called the Caribbean Basin Initiative, the CBI, which had as its central focus reserved for a non-Caribbean country, El Salvador. People tend to forget this, In a news conference in Barbados, dated the 22nd of April, 1982, on the CBI, on the Caribbean Basin Initiative, Errol Barrow traced the origin and elaboration of the concept of the Caribbean Basin to Prime Minister Eric Williams of Trinidad and Tobago and the regional titan William Dimas. It wasn't Reagan's concept. He appropriated it and he bastardized it. And Barrow was greatly offended. So he took to this news conference. Under the rubric of the Caribbean Basin, which was homegrown, several important initiatives arose. The Caribbean Food Plan, talking about homegrown, coming out from the Caribbean, not from Washington. The Caribbean Food Plan, the Trinidad, Jamaica, Guyana, Suriname, and Mexico Agreement for Practical Action in the Bauxite, Aluminum, and Petroleum Industries, and Venezuela's proposal to the Caribbean on the sale of fuel on concessionary credit terms, which in many ways resemble the updated and current Petrocaribe arrangements devised through the leaderships of Presidents Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. At this news conference in April 1982, Barrow stated thus, quote, "What I wish to reiterate for the last time is that none of these plans, that is to say the homegrown ones, called for any outside expertise or any outside financial assistance. As a matter of fact, the main rationale of the plan was to make us independent of refineries of aluminium outside, make us independent of external shipping, and make us independent of the imports of food from countries which were outside the Caribbean," unquote. over the last 20 years, few Caribbean leaders or Caribbean intellectuals have written or spoken in such visionary terms. And hardly any debate in the public fora has addressed in any focused way any of these questions or variants thereof. On the contrary, currently, when independent Caribbean or Caribbean Latin American spaces are elaborated for action to advance our people's interests, negativism and learned helplessness by those who look forward to the past are held aloft by several Caribbean academics and media practitioners as the preferred responses or options. Take the case of the proposal for Venezuela's sale of fuel for the Caribbean on concessionary terms in Barrow's time and currently under Petrocaribe. Let us listen carefully to Barrow's words at his April 1982 news conference on this matter. Quote, "Now, where did Venezuela come in on this? The Venezuelans around 1974 made an offer that they would sell oil to the territories at a price of $6 per barrel. The Venezuelans, being members of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, could not break that agreement. So what the Venezuelans said they would do was to give us credit. In other words, we would pay them $6 a barrel, and let us say the price was $12 a barrel, just for the sake of argument. They would sell us at $6 a barrel, and the other $6 we could use locally for economic development. And it would be a book entry which we would owe the Venezuelan government. Theoretically, we would owe the Venezuelans this money, but I doubt that the Venezuelan government would ever want to collect that money. There again, an initiative coming from within the Caribbean. You will ask me, what happened to the plan? It is a very sad story. This is Barrow still speaking. Some foreign ministers got together in New York. These foreign ministers, having heard about the plan from some of their leaders like Forbes Burnham, Guyana, Dr. Eric Williams, myself, and the president of Venezuela, decided that they would summon their own meeting and invited, this is in New York at the UN, these foreign ministers, summoned their own meeting and decided to invent Marish and Parish, Samco and Duppy, everybody. All the Organization of American States people, everybody, because they wanted to get international limelight. They held a meeting at the time of the United Nations General Assembly in New York without authority whatsoever from Dr. Williams, the president of Venezuela, or anybody else. At that meeting, they spoke about the Caribbean Basin Plan without anybody telling them to do so. They called the American press and they decided that they were going to have the first meeting in Caracas, Venezuela. They meant well, but they wanted to get a little limelight, a little credit, unquote. The upshot of all this was that suspicions were sown, the process was manipulated externally, the meeting never took place, whether in Caracas, Port of Spain, or Bridgetown. The similarities between the Venezuela proposal and the current Petrocaribe arrangements are self-evident. The unacceptable derision and facile opposition to Petrocaribe from some quarters, under promptings from external agencies, can never persuade the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to unsign or terminate Petrocaribe, which has proven to be quite beneficial to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It is for us a centerpiece of ALBA, of which every independent member state of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States is now a full member. It is, too, an important cornerstone of the Community of States of Latin America and the Caribbean, CELAC, a regional grouping which includes all the independent states of the countries of the Caribbean, including Cuba and our America, but excluding our traditional and enduring allies, USA and Canada, with which we are linked in the hemispheric OAS, which sadly excludes Cuba. I have absolutely no doubt that these crafted instruments of Petro-Carib and CELAC would have met with Errol Barrow's approval. It would be forever recalled that a mere 6 years after Barbados became an independent nation, that on December the 8th, 1972, Barrow joined the democratically elected leaders of Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago in having their respective governments establish formal diplomatic relations with Cuba in the teeth of opposition from and unacceptable machinations by the government of the USA. President Barack Obama and President Raul Castro of Cuba are today seeking to mend the hemispheric fracture, which for too long has been fueled by anachronistic Cold War thinking, presidential politics of South Florida, and the vanities and vainglories associated with hegemonic power. The well-grounded and finished personality known as Errol Walton Barrow, in his world outlook, practical life and living, and his political actions in our Caribbean civilization, reflected the insights of the Mexican Nobel laureate for literature, Octavio Paz, in his book, The Labyrinth of Solitude and Other Writings. This is what Paz had to say. This is what Barrow is thinking. This is what is in his works. Quote, civilization is a society's style, its way of living and dying. It embraces the erotic and culinary arts, dancing and burial, courtesies and curses, work and leisure, rituals and festivals, punishments and rewards, dealing with the dead and with the ghosts who people our dreams, attributes towards women and children, old people and strangers, enemies and allies, eternity and the present, the here and now and the beyond. A civilization is not only a system of values, but a world of forms and codes of behavior, rules and exceptions. It is society's visible side, institutions, monuments, work, things, but it is especially its submerged, invisible side, beliefs, desires, fears, repressions, dreams, unquote. The geographic location of the Caribbean close to the wealthiest and most powerful country in world history, the United States of America, has had an immense impact on our region and its people. Our geography has been as important in the shaping of our civilization as our history and demographics. Had we been located near to Vladivostok or in the Taiwan Straits, other overweening presences would have preoccupied us. Inevitably for us today, as indeed it was for Errol Barrow, we must come to terms with our hegemonic neighbor to the north. All Latin America and the Caribbean have to fashion an efficacious many-sided relationship between our island civilization and the continental civilization of the United States of America. The USA has a population of over 300 million. CARICOM, excluding the 10 million in Haiti, has a population of some 6 million. Barbados has a population of 270,000. St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 110,000. Mexico, with a population of 110 million, has this challenge and opportunity too in crafting its relationship with the United States. For Errol Barrow, one central question in our Caribbean civilization was and still is, what kind of image do we have of ourselves? In an address to a political rally in Bridgetown on May 13, 1986, just want to pause here. What I'm about to read is not a lecture delivered, in a hall. This is at a political rally in Bridgetown, at which the DLP's 27 candidates for the general elections of May 28, 1986 were introduced. Barrow didn't speak about policies that night. He spoke with profundity in clear and simple language on one matter. And this is what he said. Quote, I wish to speak to you this evening about you, about yourself. I want to know what kind of mirror image do you have of yourself? This is what I'm concerned about. Do you really like yourselves? Because you can never really like anybody unless you first like yourself. There are too many people in Barbados who despise themselves, and their dislike of themselves reflects itself in their dislike of other people. People who live next door to them, members of their family, husbands and wives, and the ox and the ass and the stranger within the gates. Let me tell you what kind of mirror image I have of you, or what the Democratic Labour Party has of you. The Democratic Labour Party has an image that the people of Barbados would be able to run their own affairs, to pay for the cost of running their own country, to have an education system which is as good as what can be obtained in any industrialized country anywhere in the world. What kind of image do you have of yourself? What kind of image do you have of yourself when you allow the mothers of this nation to be beasts of burden in the sugarcane fields? What kind of mirror image do the people of the Barbados Workers' Union have even of you or themselves? Why should only one man have a mirror image of you that you do not want to have of yourself? What kind of society we are striving for? There's no point in striving for utopia, but you do not realize your potential. There is another small country, he said, which is run by a friend of mine. The country has 210 square miles. It is 40 square miles bigger than Barbados. It is Singapore of Lee Kuan Yew. Barbados has 250,000 people. Singapore has 2.5 million on an island just a little larger than Barbados. They don't have any sugar plantations. They don't have enough land to plant more than a few orchids on. It is one of the orchid centers of the world. They don't have enough land to plant a breadfruit tree in the backyard. They have developed an educational system, and they are teaching people things that are relevant to the 21st century. They are not teaching people how to weed by the road. They are in advance of the information age. But you know the difference between you and them? He said to the people at that rally in Bridgetown. They have a mirror image of themselves. They have self-respect. They have a desire to move their country forward by their own devices. They are not waiting for anybody to come and give them handouts, unquote. Repeatedly, Errol Barrow emphasized that though the Barbadian or Caribbean person is not better than anyone else, no one is better than us. Different, but not better. This is the center which holds together the idea and reality of our Caribbean civilization, which alone represents the socio-cultural defense, nay, an inoculation against a marauding cultural imperialism, parading as universal, but fundamentally in service of a globalized imperium. No progressive society or civilization has ever been built on leisure, pleasure, or nice time. It has to be constructed on the base of hard and smart productive work. Laziness is an absence of virtue. To be sure, leisure and pleasure are necessary and desirable in life, but it has to be paid for through productive endeavors. Errol Barrow believed all this and articulated these views publicly. Accordingly, he he sought with commendable success to diversify the plantation economy into tourism, light manufacturing, and an array of other services, including finance, banking, and insurance, so as to create wealth and jobs for the people as a whole. The central handmaidens in this diversification process were a quality educational system, a modern health delivery system, marked enhancements in the physical infrastructure, reforms in the state administration, good governance arrangements, deepening regional integration, and a pragmatic and principled foreign policy. These policies and programmatic achievements under Errol Barrow's leadership were not merely an exercise in political modernization, as some critics aver. They were an incredible acceleration of a social democratic revolution which commenced in the anti-colonial uprising of 1937 and is yet fully to run its course. These measures constituted in their aggregation a further ennoblement and advance of our Caribbean civilization. In the process, the idea of Barbados emerged as an especial contribution to our Caribbean. In February 2014, I authored a brief paper entitled The Idea of Barbados. It found its way into the public fora by way of the internet. As someone who is not exactly a stranger in the gates of Barbados, though not holding this country's citizenship, I considered it opportune to contribute at the time to the public discourse on the way forward for Barbados and our Caribbean civilization. There has been so much negativism and learned helplessness about our regions and Barbados' travails that I thought that demagoguery and our Caribbean tendency of beating up ourselves were in danger of triumphing in a situation which demanded critical, independent thought. The philosophy and achievements of Errol Barrow were the starting point, which prompted me in the direction of fleshing out the idea of Barbados. Barbados is an idea which has over time become manifest in reality. The idea of Barbados encompasses more than a nation state or a national community. To be sure, it flows from a national community which has been in ownership, not residence, of an especial or particular seascape and landscape. Still, it is more than this, and it assumes a veritable autonomy as a category beyond the community. The Barbadian diaspora scattered overseas has come to draw from this specialness known as the idea of Barbados. This idea acknowledges that Barbados is unique, sui generis, of its own kind. It is connected to, nay, derived from, the physical and historical condition of Barbados, yet transcends it. The unique idea of Barbados does not and cannot make Barbados immune from the universal laws of history, society, or political economy. Indeed, the idea of Barbados has been fashioned through a parallelogram of forces and contemporary circumstances, global and regional, which have shaped and conditioned the homegrown evolutions, adaptations, alterations, and changes. More than any other Caribbean society, with the possible exception of Cuba, Barbados has arrived at a place where its uniqueness represents a model of governance, political economy, way of life, and social order, which invites emulation elsewhere in the Caribbean and further afield, albeit with appropriate amendments. Barbados' high-quality governance and level of human development have been a marvel to objective observers, including reputable international agencies. On a wide range of governance and developmental indices, Barbados is in the top rank globally, indeed overall, It is a developing country with developed nations, governance, and human development attainments. All this is extraordinary for a country of 166 square miles and 250,000 people, which is less than 200 years removed from slavery and less than 50 years as an independent nation. I make bold to say that other Caribbean member states aspire to be in an idea, but none has quite achieved that status, even though each possesses its particular nationalism. In this comparative sense, Jamaica is a brand, but not an idea. Rastafarianism, Bob Marley, Usain Bolt, and sandals have helped to shape the Jamaican brand, a marketing tool to attract visitors. But it is not a transcendental idea that infuses the body politic and society. Trinidad is an incomplete national formation, engulfed by rising lawlessness and propped up by oil. The Trinidadian intellectual Kirk Mayhew calls his country a half-made society in his book so entitled and published in 2003. Guyana's natural condition is largely untamed, but a nation which possesses enormous potential. The member states of the OECS in one way or another, consciously or unconsciously, aspire to the Barbados model. Successful British colonies such as Bermuda and the British Virgin Islands possess an artificiality which overwhelms their indigenous vitality. The French overseas territories of Martinique and Guadeloupe are subsidized enclaves in the region in search of a Caribbean identity. Puerto Rico, a Caribbean outpost of the American Empire, a confused and inchoate territory with an ill-defined future. I make these points not to in any way, and I'm not casting any aspersions on any territory. I am making a narrow comparison in relation to what I call the idea of Barbados, which emerges from Barrow's teachings. The idea of Barbados is not to coterminous with a narrow chauvinism, island nationalism, or a jaundiced arrogance, though some within and without Barbados may mistake or confuse these with the uplifting idea itself. The idea of Barbados has saved Barbados in the past and will surely enable Barbados to meet successfully its current economic challenges brought on largely, though not exclusively, by the prolonged global economic slowdown from 2008 and continuing. Barbados is at once the most conservative and the most progressive society in the Caribbean, bar none. It's a contradictory process, but it has emerged in a particular manner. Barbados extols continuity, yet engineers and embraces change. It is the only Caribbean country that has had since conquest and settlement unbroken representative government, albeit on a restrictive franchise until universal adult suffrage in 1944. It is the first Caribbean country to have attained mass adult literacy, universal primary and secondary education, and free university education. It is the first Caribbean country to have transformed its economy from sugar to tourism, international financial services, and other services. Very early, it embraced the Caribbean Court of Justice and cut the judicial umbilical cord with the Privy Council. Yet it values its connection with the British Crown. Barbados is, quote, rigid with starch and Anglicanism, to use Gordon Lewis's telling phrase of 1968, but is more relaxed informally about homosexuality than any other Caribbean country. It places a premium on the maintenance of law and order, yet zealously guards individual rights and freedoms, and the list goes on. Errol Barrow has been in the forefront of crafting the transformation which has given rise to this idea of Barbados. In Barbados, there is an invisible genius of the people, which is the foundation of the idea of Barbados. Modern social scientists refer to this social foundation as social capital, but it is more than this. The political advisor to the Prime Minister, he met me today and told me that he's doing research on social capital. Very interesting, I thought. I didn't mention to him, we didn't have enough time to talk about the subject. So modern social scientists refer to this social foundation, this invisible genius of the people as social capital. But it is more than this. I find the category of social capital an inadequate proxy for the grounded common sense of Barbadians, their social solidarity, their ability to enhance their capacity to come to terms with their condition and environment, and to address in an efficacious way any bundle of challenges which arise. Other Caribbean societies, including St. Vincent and the Grenadines, display these qualities, but Barbados seems to have them to an extraordinary degree. There is an undoubted sensibility which informs or shapes the individual and collective responses of the Barbadian people. Many other Caribbean nationals perceive this quite wrongly as a sense of Bajan superiority. It is not that. It is an attribute of quiet assurance, a manifestation of the virtue of self-mastery. That is the wellspring of a civil and civilized people steeped in progressive values, but on the bedrock of a bundle of core values lodged in the social consciousness. More than perhaps any other Caribbean nationals, they, Barbadians, following the teachings and example of Errol Barrow, appreciate, as I said before, that a progressive society is not built on leisure, pleasure, and nice time, but on hard, smart, productive work. All this is part of the idea of Barbados. Still, the productive base is unlikely to realize its full potential without its enlargement in a CARICOM single market and economy. Barrow realized that too. An acute and dispassionate observer of Barbados notices a distinctiveness that goes beyond and is partly evident from an especially unique accent in speech, a restraint in the use of bombast in day-to-day language, an intolerance of slipshod work, an insistence that government delivers basic services of quality, a settled though uneven mirror image of themselves, and an elemental patriotism devoid of gaudy exhibitionism. These observances are evident in the outlook of Barbadians of all walks of life. Rank and file Bajans, intellectuals, business folks, Bajan Rastafarians who are different than other Rastafarians. Well, writers, even though they believe in the same fundamental principles, their application of those principles are very different. I've observed it. I've interacted with them and several other Rastafari brothers and sisters across the region. This happens to writers and performers in the field of creative imagination, civil society leaders, and assorted professionals. However, cultural imperialism is in grave danger of undermining these Barbadian values and elevating a coarseness in hitherto civilized discourse. Further, the plantation legacies touching and concerning race, intertwined with class, have yet to be fully exorcised from the economy, society, and polity. Oftentimes, cultural imperialism buttresses these legacies of subordination and superordination. I have observed that, generally speaking, the best and brightest of Barbados enter its public service, whether in the civil service, the teaching service, the judiciary, or politics. At the leadership level, it has been blessed by brilliant and grounded personalities such as Grantley Adams, Errol Barrow, Tom Adams, Bernard St. John, Henry Ford, Richie Haynes, Erskine Sandiford, Owen Arthur, David Thompson, and his dear widow is here, Frundell Stewart, and Mia Motley. Surely this constellation constitutes an abundance of riches over a 60-year period. Of this galaxy, I am of the considered opinion that Errol Barrow is the greatest leader that our Caribbean region has thrown up since universal adult suffrage. In national and regional impact and influence, Barrow compares with Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore. This high-quality leadership over a sustained period is a manifestation and a buttress of the idea of Barbados. In the complex and competitive modern global circumstances, the nurturing of continued quality leadership is an awesome challenge for Barbados. The idea of Barbados is in danger, in my opinion, of being undermined if the political system fails to renew and replenish on an ongoing basis its leadership stock from the best and brightest of Barbados. I am satisfied that the idea of Barbados is the vehicle through which Barbados will successfully meet its current and prospective economic challenges. The idea of Barbados is a shared experience of Barbadians. It belongs to them. However, this shared experience must become a conscious expression and a fully articulated language for action. It is the frame of reference for continuity and change, orderly governance, and profound alterations in the political economy to accommodate the circumstances at hand. In this vein, I pose an overarching query, which I raised a year ago in the context of my 2014 budget address in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The query for Barbados is this: can the socio-economic model initiated by Errol Barrow, perfected by subsequent governments, and which came to maturation under Owen Arthur, can this model be sustained in a period of prolonged global economic slowdown and continued economic uncertainty? If the answer is yes to this query, that it can be sustained in this period, a temporizing wait-and-see attitude or approach may be in order. If the answer is no, alteration and adaptations appropriate to the condition are clearly necessary and desirable. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I suspect in Barbados, a temporizing or wait-and-see is out of the question. An appropriate strategic framework balancing prudence and enterprise, coupled with specially targeted interventions, is likely to foster economic growth and fiscal consolidation. The correct answer to the overarching query which I have posed within the articulated context of the idea of Barbados is likely to yield uplifting results. Thus, rather than propose a particular policy without an articulated context, the policy should be put within the appropriate strategic framework. Once it is appreciated that the extant socio-economic model is not sustainable at a time of a prolonged global economic slowdown, and that Barbados has always triumphed in challenging circumstances, the people are likely to respond understandingly and favorably. So, for example, a contribution from students to their own educational investment at the tertiary level is less likely to be opposed if the altered circumstances are understood and properly explained. If the answer to the overarching query, articulated context and strategic framework, including targeted interventions, are fully elaborated, references to Barrow's legacy or Bajan's birthright would be seen as mechanistic and thus intellectually and practically untenable. The foundation stone of Errol Barrow's ideas and political praxis must be appropriately interrogated, and the underlying principles and practices applied, not in a rote fashion, but in their essence and with flexibility as the practical circumstances admit. I am grappling with similar considerations and policy programmatic issues in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Unless we have intellectual clarity ourselves, we are likely to lose our way. Fundamentally, the idea of Barbados faces enormous challenges from the process of globalization and its attendant discontents. Globalization facilitates an increasing homogenization of culture propagated by a dominant cultural imperialism. Globalization is impatient of localization, but the idea of Barbados strengthens the quest for a particular space within a wider universalism. This dialectical engagement between the local and the global does not necessarily presage an undermining of the idea of Barbados, but an enrichment of it. Still, it is a challenging endeavor. We must have faith that the idea of Barbados will endure, but faith is made complete or perfect with deeds. I want to finish this lecture this evening by making some other brief comments about Errol Barrow's transformative leadership in these respects. In assessing the influence, quality, and transformative leadership of Errol Barrow, we ought to resist the temptation of focusing on the multitude of individual and tactical decisions which any political leader, and particularly those in our small Caribbean countries, may make. Instead, our emphasis ought to be on the strategic approaches elaborated, adopted, and implemented. Any political leader who is required to make numerous particularistic decisions, as Caribbean prime ministers do on a daily basis, relating to this or that matter, is likely to chalk up some errors relating to persons or things. Undoubtedly, an individual here or there may have a prime ministerial discretion exercised unfavorable to him or her, but which in no way undermines, hampers, or reflects adversely on the forward thrust of the society. Leaders are invariably assessed on the larger strategic issues, even though it is of importance always to get the small things right. Of course, if negligence and wrongheadedness on the small things are so egregious and widespread, the haunting specter of maladministration may become so pervasive that it subverts strategic accomplishments. This was not evident in Barrow's case. In all assessments, the context and circumstances are of fundamental account. In a speech delivered in 1980 at a graduation ceremony of the University of the West Indies here in Cave Hill, one of the foremost writers of the creative imagination in the 20th century, George Lamin, had this to say, quote, "Men make their own history, but we can only make that portion of it which our concrete circumstances allow. We do not choose the time or place of our birth, nor the parents who make this possible, but the process of our thought, the hidden nature of our deeds, the character and quality of our imagination may be decisively influenced by these origins. Our struggle towards freedom is experienced always within the external constraints of nature and the invincible limitations of our own resources," unquote. This is Lamin's refinement of Karl Marx's brilliant work entitled The 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, published in 1869. This is what Marx had to say. I know it's unusual for a Caribbean prime minister to quote Marx. but he is a writer of extraordinary perspicacity. This is what Marx said, and I'm dealing with leadership. Quote, men make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living. And just when they seem engaged in revolutionizing themselves and things, in creating something that has never yet existed, precisely in such periods of revolutionary crisis, they anxiously conjure up the spirits of the past to their service and borrow from them names, battle cries, and costumes in order to present the new scene of world history in this time-honored disguise and this borrowed language, unquote. I'm sure many of you can identify with this. I am sure that the insights of Lamin and Marx are helpful in the assessment of Errol Barrow's leadership and his immense contributions, amidst his much lesser failures or limitations. Such an assessment must always avoid abstractions and stylized polemics. Although this is not an occasion for an exploration of Errol Barrow's biography, and it amazes me that in 27 years we haven't had a full-length biography of this extraordinary leader who is one of the region's national heroes. So, although this is not an exploration of his biography, we acknowledge the influences on and the shaping of his political praxis as leader, his parenting and family, his socialization generally, his education and training, his active service in the Second World War, the shaping of his nationalism, regionalism, and social democracy in London as a student, his experiences as a lawyer in Barbados, his profound grasp of the nature of our Caribbean's physical environment, land, sea, and air, and that the impact of those on our people, his political activism from the early 1950s, the history of British colonialism, struggles worldwide, the advances made by social democracy and socialism globally, the contradictions and evolution of the plantation economy in Barbados, the nature of the dominant bourgeois political economy globally, and the internationalization of monopoly capital. All of these things influenced Barrow. Barrow's achievement in leading the transformation of Barbados from a veritable plantation village into a modern, sophisticated nation is now legendary. But this is not mere legend. It is factual. Brilliant as the political scientist Gordon Lewis was, in his magisterial volume, The Growth of the Modern West Indies, published in 1968. He was in error in his assessment of Errol Barrow as simply, quote-unquote, a modernizer. To be fair to Lewis, he had not yet seen the flowering of Barbados' social democracy applied to the domestic and external circumstances of Barbados. My settled view of the whole of Barrow's record is that he was a transformative and not a transactional leader. Tom Adams was of the latter type, a transactional leader. Errol Barrow's social democracy, which he sometimes labeled as socialism, was creative in its application in a small social economy with exchange relations with international capitalism. Ravaged by the incubus of colonialism, long after colonialism had departed, and the legacies of the plantation system, in a world dismissive and ignorant of or even hostile to the condition of small states. To describe him and his political praxis as Fabian socialist and mere modernizer is to stylize the facts in search of a theory of explanation, and the record is there. Barrow's leadership was of an especial high quality. To be sure, he inspired the people whom he led, but more importantly, he drew out of them that what was good and noble in them. Oftentimes he drew out goodness and nobility which the people did not as yet know that they possessed. So he did not simply instill. He did something more profoundly lasting. And he caused his people to deliver above the very limitations which they had imposed on themselves. Barrow assessed adroitly his people's possibilities and limitations, strengths and weaknesses, and drew out of them far more than what they knew that they possessed. Frankly, this is revolutionary leadership in societies accustomed to commandist modes of leadership, propped up by gubernatorial and colonial inheritances. And he did it all without posturing, without pandering to backwardness, without a facile genuflection to passing fads, or the naked opportunism of ruthless RWT, L-E-W-S, of ruthless persons who believe in little or nothing, save and except the pursuit of an insatiable thirst for a demeaning and illusory power. Errol Barrow's towering accomplishments were not accompanied by any sacralization of personal power. His mystique arose not from any sacredness, contrived or otherwise, but from humility, commitment to the people, and a simple lifestyle. He eschewed, nay, opposed the presidential demeanor and imitative mockeries so evident in post-colonial leaderships in our region and elsewhere. He turned askance against official corruption, railed against it, and succeeded in keeping it at a minimal level. He undoubtedly would have concurred with H.A. Vaughan's scornful portrayal of certain demagogues. And this is our own Hilton A. Vaughan. And I'm sure Barrow would have agreed with this. Quote, his poem, Vaughan's poem. Like blackbirds in their shiny coats, pricking and lifting spry, proud feet, bickering and picking sodden oats from horses offal in the streets, unquote. Today, in our Caribbean, the political gospel of hopelessness and helplessness by so many who occupy high perches in politics, academia, the church, business, and the commentariat would have found no support from Errol Barrow. He was always positive about the possibilities, abilities, and resources of our Caribbean to sustain and advance our civilization. He worried not about adversities and limitations. Rather, he framed them into his personal or political calculus in moving forward. He never forgot our blessings, our strengths and possibilities, which are huge. One senses that his early socialization and his life's experiences had imbued him with the age-old lesson from the Sermon on the Mount, as told in the book of Matthew. Quote, "O you of little faith. So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat? What shall we drink? What shall we wear? For the pagans run after these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow. For tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own." Unquote. This settled positive outlook is needed now more than ever in our public discourses. To be sure, in each of us there is a tension between the positive and the negative. Which will triumph? The one which we feed. The feeding of the positive and not the negative is vital for individual and collective advancement, indeed redemption. The strand of overwhelming negativism and undue worry engendered by those who ought to know better and accepted uncritically by those who do not is frequently conjoined with an undue haste to get things done, which bears no relationship to the real world or the actual concrete conditions of life and living. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the folk have a profound saying, hurry, hurry, bird, now build goodness. Elias Canetti, the distinguished European Nobel laureate for literature, drew our attention to one dimension of this avoidance of the concrete in his remarkable book entitled The Conscience of Words and Air Weakness, published in 1987. Quote, among the most sinister phenomena in intellectual history is the avoidance of the concrete. People have had a conscious tendency to go first after most remote things, ignoring everything they stumble over close by. The elan of outgoing gestures, the boldness and adventure of expeditions to faraway places, camouflage their motives. The not infrequent goal is to avoid what lies near because we are not up to it. One would have to be very narrow-minded to condemn this adventurous of the mind, even though it sometimes comes from obvious weaknesses. It has led to an expansion of our horizon, of which we are proud. But the situation of mankind today, as we all know it, is so serious that we have to turn to what is closest and most concrete, unquote. This observation, the observation thus of the concrete condition at hand, is the starting point of scientific inquiry, from which hypotheses emerge for testing on the way to a determination of the causal relationships or interconnections amidst all their contradictions within the real condition. It is from this process of intellectual probing, which includes the drawing upon the storehouse of accumulated thought and wisdom, and study of the data, that theories of explanation arrived at and fine-tuned for public policy and programs in the people's interest. This fact-based inquiry and analysis, policy making and programmatic implementation are at odds with the wild abstractions, invariably fueled by hidden motives or agendas designed to hold aloft that which is strategically negative and subversive of the public good. The intellectual haste which prompts negative abstractions is propelled by persistent demands for instant delivery of this or that. So instant coffee, instant cocoa, instant communication, and instant KFC and so forth fashion unwittingly a mentality for instant satisfaction of public goods and services without regard for the means or the resources sufficient for that satisfaction instantly or at all. Upon a close examination of Errol Barrow's political praxis, one discerns these multiple considerations. At the core is an acknowledgement that public responsibility of leaders has to be matched by citizenry or individual responsibility in every sphere of life and living. Bickering constantly about others' efforts without a delivery of your own optimal output to add value to the enterprise achieves one thing: a boosting of the complaining industry. And those who hunger for power, glory, and material well-being are likely to find that their longing is insatiable in the real world. Sadly, their desire almost always outruns their capacity or opportunity for attainment. Thus, perpetual satisfaction becomes their lot, resulting in unnecessary and oftentimes dangerous conflicts and divisiveness. No public policy can quell this permanent state of dissatisfaction, driven by such personal, insatiable hunger. Errol Barrow taught us all of this. The study of his praxis remains indispensable for the further advancement of our Caribbean civilization and the idea of Barbados. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, our featured speaker. At this time, I'd like to introduce Mr. Joshua Gay. He is a 20-year-old student here at the UWI. He is studying accounts and he's in his final year. He's also a former student of the St. Matthew's Primary and Harrison College. He's a singer, songwriter, and keyboardist. In 2012 and 2013, he participated in NIFCA and received multiple awards, including the inaugural Jackie Opel Award. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Joshua Gay.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Prime Minister of Barbados, the Honorable Frondell Stewart, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez. Good evening. I'm going to be doing two pieces for you this evening. And the first one is a popular folk song by a Barbadian by the name of the Mighty Gabby. This one is called Emerton. You tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right here, so alright, I say I shall go. You tell me to forget that it's here I want my own children to grow. Alright, I say I shall go. And I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. And I hope you know it's true. I will never forgive you, because look what you do to my Emerton. You tell me to forget that you bring the bulldozers and push down the houses, so alright, I say I shall go. You tell me to forget that you bring the bulldozers and push down the houses, so alright, I say I shall go. And I hope you understand how I feel about Emerton, my homeland, my homeland, my homeland. And I hope you know it's true. I will never forgive you, because look what you do to my Emerton. You tell me to forget that my grandmother was born right here, so alright, I say I shall go. 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 Because look at what you do to my Everton. Thank you. And as we all know, there was a recent tragedy in St. Vincent, and the next song I'd just like to dedicate to all the families that have lost ones, and just to share the love to all of you. So this next one is a popular song by John Legend. This one is called All of Me. Thank you. What would I do without your smart mouth, drawing me in and you kicking me out? Got my head spinning, no kidding, I can't pin you down. What's going on in that beautiful mind? I'm on your magical mystery ride, and I'm so dizzy, don't know what hit me, but I'll be alright. My head's underwater, but I'm breathing fine. You're crazy and I'm out of my mind, 'cause all of me loves all of you, loves your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Give your all to me, I'll give my all to you. You're my end and my beginning, even when I lose I'm winning, 'cause I give you all of me, and you give me all of you. How many times do I have to tell you, even when you're crying, you're beautiful too. The world is beating you down, I'm around through every muse. You're my downfall, you're my muse, my worst distraction, my rhythm and blues. I can't stop singing, it's ringing in my head for you. My head's underwater, but I'm breathing fine. You're crazy and I'm out of my mind, 'cause all of me loves all of you, loves your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Give your all to me, I give my all to you. You're my end and my beginning, even when I lose I'm winning, 'cause I give you all Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you to Joshua Gay, performing Emerton by our own Gabby, and All of Me by John Legend. At this time, we are going to go into the award section of this evening's presentation, and I'm going to read the bios first as they appear in the booklet, and then the awardees will be called to receive their awards, after which they will remain on stage for a group photo. It's the Pride of Barbados Award, and our first bio is of Jasmine Barton. Jasmine Barton, a quiet person with a great sense of humor, has been a party member since 1983 and a supporter for more than 40 years. She has served as either secretary or assistant secretary on the St. Michael South East, St. Michael South Central, and St. Michael South branches. She also spent 1 year on the General Council. Now in her mid-70s, she's retired after working as a ranger warder with the National Conservation Commission for 17 years. Before that, she was a seamstress and a shop assistant in Bridgetown. This alumnus of the St. Leonard's Girls Secondary School is actually one of the first students to attend there when it opened its doors in 1952. Never one to keep still, the very energetic Jasmine regularly attends service at the St. Leonard's Anglican Church and is a member of the Evergreens, which is made up of seniors in the church, the Mothers Union, and the Floral Group. She is also a member of the Golden Voices Choir, which meets every Tuesday, and she's an active member of the Democratic League of Women. On retirement, she started and completed a computer course and another in organic backyard gardening. Out of this course came the Third Saturday Club, which meets to share tips and sometimes produce from the members' gardens. Her hobbies are cooking, reading, and doing crossword puzzles. Her life is summed up in the last verse of a poem by Bruce Wilmer, which says, "It is hard to follow any plan precisely to the letter. Though life right now is difficult, things in time will get better." Clyde Chase, after returning from the United Kingdom in 1973, he joined the Democratic Labour Party by invitation from Charles Stout, the then chairman of the St. George North constituency. Since then, he has served on 3 branches where he served as either chairman or vice chairman. Together, he and Mr. Astor B. Watts moved branch meetings at St. Michael's Southeast from 1 to 2 a month. After the party lost elections in 1976, the boundary was changed, and in 1981, he was elected chairman of the St. Michael East constituency branch. Even without the assistance of a caretaker, the branch won the President's Cup for the best branch. In 1986, the boundary was changed again, and this time he was elected chairman of the St. Michael Central constituency branch. To this day, he is still a hard and dedicated worker for the Democratic Labour Party. Overton Franklin joined the Democratic Labour Party in 1992, but his support goes back to the days of Winter Crawford, who represented Overton's home parish of St. Philip for more than 2 decades, Reynold Weeks, who won the seat in 1976, and Harold Blackman, who occupied it from 1981 to 1991. During his first year as a party member, he was elected vice chairman of the St. Philip South Branch and has served in several posts, including secretary, assistant secretary, and now as chairman of the branch. He also served on the General Council membership. This active trade unionist and credit unionist says he was attracted to the Democratic Labour Party because of its grassroots philosophy, which appealed to the working class. Overton, who is a husband, father of 3, and grandfather of 1, has been an employee of Goddard Catering Barbados Limited for the last 47 years. Gloria Hoyt only votes one place and for one party. That is in the constituency of St. Michael Central and for the Democratic Labour Party. Affectionately known as Pearl, she joined the Democratic Labour Party 31 years ago, but has supported the party since 1964. Her support is unwavering. She has worked tirelessly, canvassing day and night during elections and after. While a plus for her fellow Dems, her fervent and sometimes vocal backing of candidates has been a bugbear for the other side. Gloria loves the Democratic Labour Party, and she never hesitates to share with everyone what the party stands for and what it has achieved during its 60 years of existence. Among these, the legacy of the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow, whom she deeply admires. She speaks glowingly of his introduction of free education and how it has benefited her and her family. The mother of 5 boys has also insisted that her grandchildren take advantage of the opportunities offered through a solid education. Now retired from the government service, this devout Methodist is spending time with her family, continuing her work with the Democratic League of Women, and of course, singing the praises of her beloved party. Egbert Maloney. This member considers himself a Barrow Badian, as he had very close ties with the Right Excellent Errol Barrow through their shared interest in aviation and agriculture. His interest in agriculture has led him to contribute to the 4-H movement as well. He was born into the political arena as his father ran for local government during the double-member constituency period and sat on the Southern District Council, an institution within the then local system of government. At the tender age of 22, he cast his vote for the first time for the Democratic Labour Party in 1971, and at age 27, he became a member of the party and the Christchurch East Branch. He has had the distinction of canvassing with the Democratic Labour Party candidates like Dennis Hunt and former members of Parliament Edwy Talma, Ginger Bourne, Tyrone Estwick, and the present Member of Parliament, Dr. the Honourable Dennis Lowe. He remains the longest-standing chairman of this branch from 2002 to present. Currently, he is acting as the chairman, as the substantive chairman is on maternity leave. His work with the branch has resulted in it being awarded the Branch Award for joining the largest number of persons in the party. He also contributes to the development of the party through his work with the General Council, on which he has sat for a number of years. He presently sits on the Constituency Council and has been instrumental in assisting families whose houses had been damaged during Hurricane Thomas. Ladies and gentlemen, our Mirror Image Award goes to Mr. Clayton Coppin. Comrade Coppin has devoted all his adult life to the principles of the Democratic Labour Party, and if a title was to be conferred on him, he could be described as the party's chief canvasser. His knowledge of politics is not restricted to the districts, as he's often seen conducting training sessions for branch members. His activities in the party and support span over 4 decades, but he officially signed his membership card in 1986. He is a devoted sportsman who loves to see the youth excel in productive ways through sporting activities and loves to watch and organize football and cricket for the people of his St. John constituency and beyond. Shy and unassuming, he abhors the limelight, but he is a man who is firmly dedicated to the welfare of the poor and vulnerable and is committed to this Democratic Labour Party, the engine through which he endeavors to serve the people of this country. Clayton is a Capricorn man born on the 10th of January 1947 and hails from College Savannah in St. John. This hard worker, who probably will not want to come up to collect his award, has functioned on behalf of the Democratic Labour Party for well over 40 years. He is currently the chairman of the St. John branch of the party, a post that he has held since the early 1990s. Consequently, he has worked side by side with our late leader, the Honourable David Thompson, whom he fiercely defended as much as he defended and still defends the party. While managing and coordinating the St. John branch, he's also been integrally involved with the Democratic Labour Party headquarters at George Street, where he has been part of coaching candidates and those who work with them, assisting the General Secretary, serving on the General and or Executive Councils, recruiting new members, organizing the annual party conference, and so much more. In short, he is a vital cog in the machinery that runs the noble institution called the Democratic Labour Party, and all of this he does without seeking fame and glory. At present, he works in the Prime Minister's office, where he continues his support and assisting role to the Prime Minister and President of this great party. Ladies and gentlemen, the Pride of Barbados Award goes to Miss Jasmine Barton, Mr. Clyde Chase, Mr. Overton Franklin, Miss Gloria Hoyt, Mr. Egbert Maloney, and the Mirror Image Award to Mr. Clayton Coppin. At this time, I would like to invite the Honourable Frundell Stewart to the stage to present the awards, and I will call each awardee as they appear in the booklet. Ms. Jasmine Barton, Mr. Clyde Chase, whom I understand his award will be accepted by Mr. Astor B. Watts, Mr. Overton Franklin, Ms. Gloria Hoyt, Mr. Egbert Maloney, and we hope that Mr. Clayton Coppin will come to receive the Mirror Image Award. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a round of applause. We're asking the awardees to please remain on the stage because there will be a group photo after with the Prime Minister and with Dr. Gonzalez. Please remain on the stage. We now invite our featured speaker, Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonzalez, to come to the stage and receive a gift from the Democratic Labour Party, presented by Prime Minister Frundell Stewart. And if you wanted to have a sneak peek, Prime Minister Gonzalez is receiving one book reflecting our mirror image lectures to commemorate the life and work of the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow, edited by the Honorable Ronald Jones. He's also receiving the book The Life and Times of Errol Barrow by the late Peter Morgan, and of course, a bottle of our finest Mount Gay rum. This is an opportunity for anyone wanting to take photos of our awardees and the recipient of our Mirror Image Award, and of course our two Prime Ministers, to go right ahead. And we'd ask the two Prime Ministers if they can actually come to the middle so we can have them in the center for our photo. Yes, if you may. Thank you. We want you in the middle. So you can... Thank you so much to our awardees and our Prime Ministers. You may take your seats. Yes, you may take your seat. Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you again. At this time, I would like to invite Senator Andre Worrell, Assistant General Secretary of the Democratic Labour Party, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Good evening. Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Frundell Stewart, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Honorable Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, Her Honor, Senator Carrie-Ann Eiffel, President of the Senate, members of Cabinet, members of Parliament, Executive Council and General Council, our specially invited guests tonight, the Barrow family, friends and patrons, good night. I want to start this evening by expressing a deep appreciation to our guest speaker who agreed to deliver this lecture after receiving an invitation from our party leader who the relationship between our two countries is well known and deeply rooted in the hopes and aspiration of the integration process. Prime Minister Gonzalez, we deeply appreciate your travel here and the time you took to craft the message of Errol Barrow, our Caribbean civilization, and the idea of Barbados. You feel free to clap. You eloquently took us through a contextualization of the work of Barrow, from the establishment of an independent nation to his work in the development of the Caribbean community and imprinting his ideology on national, regional, and the international level, empowering not just Barbadians, but all persons of the Caribbean to the realization that no one is better than us, different but not better. We especially thank you for your profound thesis of Barrow as a transformational leader, which is exemplified in your description of the idea of Barbados. We can acknowledge that as a leader, he elaborated a strategic approach, adopted it, and implemented it, all while inspiring the people and drawing out of them abilities which they did not know they possess. Prime Minister Gonzalez, we will be forever indebted to you for this positive and inspiring lecture. We thank you. We also extend a big thank you to the staff of Prime Minister Gonzalez's office, in particular, Ms. Angie Jackson, who responded promptly to all of our concerns and ensured that the confirmations were all in place. Ms. Jackson is truly a credit to your office, and please take back our words of appreciation. To our party leader and Prime Minister, who had indicated months ago in a planning meeting that he was looking at inviting his colleague from St. Vincent to deliver this memorial lecture. Our party was very careful to frame what he expected of this activity in the 60th year of our celebrations and kept on top of the planning agenda. He identified carefully what our awardees should represent in this period, and so those selected on this occasion represent a section of party members who are, among others, to be honored later in the year. Prime Minister and party leader, thank you for making this event what it turned out to be today. Your advice and guidance was well located. This moment is about our late leader and national hero, the Right Excellent Errol Walton Barrow. And so in that vein, we want to say a much and deep appreciation for the time that members of the Barrow family took to be part of this evening. This event is a feature on our annual calendar, and we always look forward to the fellowship with those members of our great leader and founder. To you seated here tonight, thank you for your attending and supporting as you usually do. The awardees, Ms. Jasmine Barton, Mr. Clyde Chase, Mr. Overton Franklin, Ms. Gloria Hoyt, Mr. Egbert Maloney, and especially Mr. Clayton Copping. We extend our congratulations, but also want to thank you for your efforts and time you have taken over the decades away from your family and loved ones to ensure that this party stays relevant. This party is what it is today because of the efforts of people like yourself and so many more who are scattered throughout Barbados and the diaspora. We are truly appreciative of the time you have given, and so we say thank you. And we are especially grateful for Mr. Copping for deciding to grace us by accepting the award tonight. I want to turn next to the staff at our headquarters. We very often, in the hustle of the grind, tend to forget the glue that keeps events like this ticking over until they are completed. And the staff at headquarters really delivered in their efforts to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. They designed the screensavers and did all the PowerPoints we saw here tonight. We wish to thank you. To the staff and management of the Hilton Hotel, we appreciate the accommodation arrangements that were put in place to facilitate our guest speaker and trust that once again the professional service of the staff of Hilton encourages the Prime Minister to return soon. To the service providers who are always mobilized and ready to serve, the caterers from Almond Bay, who never disappoint. The team led by Ronnie Gittins is by no doubt a company that thrives on detail. Tropical Print Services and Mr. Cortez Seeley, who assisted in detailing and designing all the printed material we have in our hands tonight. Tropical Print Services provided advice in getting the document laid out and printed. Once again, we thank you. Future Shock Services, led by Mr. David Springer, who continues to be a platform of efficiency in the delivery of his IT expertise. Mr. Springer is responsible for the people of St. Vincent having the ability to tune in live as their Prime Minister delivers this lecture. We streamed the full contents of the lecture and the evening, so it will be available on the party's website at dlpbarbados.org. David, we thank you for your expertise you continue to offer. We want to express appreciation to our youthful entertainer, Joshua Gay, who has a fantastic grasp as a musician for what touches and has surely touched us tonight. Joshua is a student of accounting at our Cave campus, but continues to demonstrate the importance of having additional skill sets. Joshua, we say thank you for the pieces delivered here this evening, and may your energies in this respect produce the dream you have. Treehouse Communication, who ensured that all the techs and awardees were interviewed and drilled in an effort to prepare the profiles that were delivered here today. We understand that despite asking people to write something on themselves, two things occur. Either they write too much or too little, and that's where Treehouse Communication made a difference. We thank you. To the staff of the Errol Barrow Center for Creative Imagination, the staff and technical support team here at the center, led by Carla Springer, we want to thank you and ask you to keep the excellent service you provide here at the center up and going. They really worked with us as we went through the process of conducting our rehearsals to make sure we were fitting the bill. To the ushers, to those young persons who volunteered, we say thank you, and to the chief usher, Mr. Coppin, who assisted in coordinating the group. We want to publicly acknowledge the good work of Medford Mahogany, who were responsible for these awards. While Mountgate assisted in the donation of the 1703, the literature of Barrow we gave as our gift to Prime Minister Gonzalez was edited by our very own Ronald Jones, who continues to contribute to our political hardware. To other persons who took part in tonight's activities, Monsignor Vincent Harcourt Blackett, Senator Verla de Pisa, and Senator the Honorable Maxine McLean, we thank you for your assisting us here tonight. We also want to give a special thank you to our hard-working General Secretary, George Pilgrim, for his attention to detail and ensuring that every aspect of the function flowed with clockwork precision. While off island for the period of January, he left specific instructions with myself and Mr. Coppin regarding what was to be done. Despite the costs associated with roaming, George still continued to beam instructions. As Assistant General Secretary serving with George for the first time, I can testify that what people say about him is true. George works hard and he normally delivers. George, we thank you. And finally, to the Master of Ceremonies, we thank you. To our Master of Ceremonies, we experience once again your smooth voice and control of the evening proceedings, and we wish to thank you. And to you, all of you who joined us here tonight for this very inspiring lecture and evening, we thank you for joining us, and we wish you a good night.
Well, that has brought us to the end of this year's lecture and award presentation. I would just ask that you stand so that Prime Minister Frandell Stewart and Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves can leave us, and then the Barrow family will follow, and we invite you to join them for refreshments in the foyer. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much and have a good night.